Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so there it is. All right, now I have the chat. Okay. So let me wish good morning to everyone who logs on. What's popped up on my screen is Ron Howard, and from Happy Days, right? He
Yeah.
was a kid in Happy Days,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
but now he's a very successful
Director.
director
Oh,
and screenwriter and all kinds of
Mhm.
stuff.
Mhm.
And it's hard to believe. Okay, now what did I do? Get rid of that. Okay. So I've got the YouTube chat, and good morning. I suspect we have two watching now. So fortunate, and I think one of them is Art, because Art is my most reliable follower on YouTube, Art
Good.
Patterson. And so let's see, we'll watch here. I want to pull this over so I can see. Yep, and I'm right. It is Art. He greeted me. So hello, Art. It's good to have you here. And there we go. Okay. So we're in this section called the magician, and we're working through what Dr. Jung means by the word magician, and it's rather interesting to me what he thinks here. And before I begin this section, there at the very beginning of it, there's a footnote. The footnote is number 269. And it is right before the second part of this chapter on the magician. And the footnote reads, Jung's marginal note in the calligraphic volume, January 1924. He has this marginal note, Jan 1924. This seems to refer to when this passage was transcribed into the calligraphic volume. The writing at this point gets larger with more space between the words. At this time, Carrie Baines commenced her transcription. So in 1924, Carrie Baines transcribed what became the Red Book, and so he, oh boy, I'm trying to think of where her comment is, because she said how this was written in blood, and obviously Jung in January 1924 had put over 10 years into the Red Book in one way or another, although most of it, up until this point, most of it took place between December 25th, 1913 and January 27th, 1914. So this was the moment in time when Dr. Jung was recognizing the collective unconscious because of his 12 dreams and visions that he was having during those times, and they were very powerful. So, part two. It is an error to believe that there are magical practices that one can learn. One cannot understand magic. One can only understand what accords with reason. Magic accords with unreason, which one cannot understand. the world accords not only with reason, but also with unreason. But just as one employs a reason to make sense of the world, in that what is reasonable about it approaches reason, a lack of understanding also accords with unreason. All right, so if we think of any magic act that we might have seen in our lifetime, we have to think that, if we don't know what the trick is, the trick of the magician, who is an illusionist, he or she creates an illusion that we believe, and then we say, how did he do that, right? And because we want to have reason and we can't figure out how such and such was done. For example, the doves coming out of the sleeves of the magician, or the woman being sawed in half, or what have you. And so but the reality is that there is unreason. There are things in the world which we cannot explain with our reason. And gradually as we age and are educated, we are able to, figure out more and more. For example, the stork brought the baby, for example. So the child doesn't understand the source of the baby. But as we get older, we understand more and more about that. And the tooth fairy brings money in return for teeth you've lost. Well, that's unreasonable to believe that, but obviously millions of children do believe it. So going on, this meeting is magical and eludes comprehension. Magical understanding is what one calls non-comprehension. Everything that works magically is incomprehensible, and the incomprehensible often works magically. One calls incomprehensible workings magical. The magical always surrounds me, always involves me. It opens spaces that have no doors and leads out into the open where there is no exit. The magical is good and evil, and neither good nor evil. Magic is dangerous, since what accords with unreason confuses, allures, and provokes, and I am always its first victim. So this morning I looked at my watch, and one of the 5 headlines was that a beloved actor from the television program Friends, Matthew Perry, has died at the age of 54. And obviously that's very disheartening to Matthew Perry's fans, and unreasonable. But then as we hear more and more of the news, we understand that he may have had a problem with substance abuse, and he was found dead and unresponsive. And so there was a call at 4 p.m. yesterday afternoon, California time, that brought first responders to his house. So somebody had found him, and he was unresponsive. And so even death is a kind of magic trick, because nothing has changed except the individual who has died has lost consciousness. But what hasn't changed is their soul and spirit are still with us. And so if I take the death of my parents, for example, or my brother, I feel them in me every bit as much as I did during their lifetimes. And they are still having major influence on me, although not directly, obviously. And Janti says they're not dead, they're just unavailable. Right, they're not dead because they're alive in you and in your heart. And so death is nothing to fear. And the question is, what will your life mean to those that survive, and those that survive going on down through the generations? Because as I said on Wednesday in the advanced reading group, we are the symbol of the hopes and fears of all the generations that preceded us. Okay, going back to single cell organisms, the single cell organisms that invented sex had a certain hope about what that would mean. And all of our ancestors going back that far have done two things. They survived until they reproduced, very simply. They survived until they reproduced. They all did that successfully. And so, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to have physical children, because once we have entered the field of dreams, namely our lifetimes, we have an opportunity to do something with it. We're all winners of the lottery. We're all, every single human being has been selected from millions of single-celled organisms, namely spermatozoa. There are millions in each attempt at fertilization. And so we already have won the lottery by being the one that got through and began to gestate in our mother's wombs. And so once we are here in the field of dreams, we can make a contribution to human life one way or another. That doesn't necessarily mean we have to have children, progeny, but we can affect human life in many ways. For example, Catholic priests who don't have children obviously affect their community very much. And, you know, that is magic. There's no rhyme or reason to it, but they do. And so what we know about all religions is that they all provide us with comfort, and regardless of what religion it is. And so they all provide us with comfort. They all provide us with a way to deal with loss. Life is tough. I mean, all you have to do is look around the animal kingdom to see just how tough. When you see, you know, a squirrel or a deer killed on the side of the road, that squirrel, or from that squirrel or deer's point of view, they didn't understand that those headlights coming at them were about to kill them, and yet and yet that's what happened to them. But their spirit, the spirit of those that you see on the road dead, get infused in you, and maybe it makes you drive more slowly, and maybe it makes you rethink how you drive and how you do defensive driving, for example, which, who knows, might save any number of lives going forward. I mean, I saw an accident in New Orleans about a couple weeks ago that something like 29 people were killed in one collision, and it wasn't a bus or anything, it was all cars. And so you're driving along minding your business, and all of a sudden you're dead. That can happen. So anyway, so the magical things are the unreasonable things. So let me read on. I'm not sure where I stopped. Okay, yeah, okay. Where reason abides, one needs no magic. Hence, our time no longer needs magic. Only those without reason needed it to replace their lack of reason. But it is thoroughly unreasonable to bring together what suits reason with magic, since they have nothing to do with one another. Both become spoiled through being brought together. Therefore, all those lacking reason, quite rightly, fall into superfluity and disregard. A rational man of this time will therefore never use magic. And there's a footnote. In Psychological Types, 1921, Jung wrote, reason can only give one equilibrium if one's reason is already an equilibrating organ. As a rule, man needs the opposite of his actual condition to force him to find his place in the middle. And so the point is that all of us need to find the middle way, our way, because if you live solely by reason, then you live too rigidly and cannot enjoy your life. But if you live completely by unreason, then we have 100,000 fentanyl deaths in the United States that are totally unreasonable. Why do people allow themselves to be taken in by that and allow themselves to be killed by an illegal drug? Who knows? The shadow knows. Okay. John C. says, my father never shuts up. He used to say death is slipping off tight shoes. Yeah. And Richard says, single-celled is a fitting description. Catholic Mass is truly all magic in a godly way. It's the only place I observe angels in human form. And something else. KTBIWK says a great reflection on duality. Okay, so going on. So we have to live in the middle of reason and unreason, and lots of things have happened that were unpredictable. For example, last night I was watching this perfectly terrible movie called The Winds of Kitty Hawk. And I call it terrible because the movie had a very poor screenplay, and it was poorly acted. And so if I were to give it in a panoply of 5 stars, I would have to give it 0. However, it was about the first days of flight, and about Wilbur and Orville Wright, and about Len Curtis, who also was one of the first movers in human flight. There had been many before, of course. People have been using hot air balloons and that sort of thing for hundreds of years, but they were also failing. For example, Langley had a contract with the Navy to prove that he could fly off of a ship, and he kept flying off his ship and ending up in the Potomac River. So he was not the first to fly. He was the first to get a contract, but not the first to fly. And so what we know from human society is that learning how to fly was a big thing. It took a long time. And then if we go back only 120 years, that's a snap of the fingers for the human species. Those guys were flying kites. They were basically flying kites with motorcycle engines on them. And motorcycle engines were only less than 10 years old at the time that they were doing that. There were barely any automobiles at that time. And yet in that next 120 years, no one 120 years ago could have predicted that we would have tens of thousands of jet airplanes flying around the United States, carrying millions of Americans and other nationalities every day across the United States and around the world. That was just not even imaginable 120 years ago. And today I call them executive mailing tubes, because basically that's what it is. You get on an airplane in Washington or New York, and 12 hours later you're in Dubai or Qatar. And so it's magic. It's unreasonable for that to be the case, but nonetheless, that is true. So Jordan, welcome.
Good morning.
I'm getting used to you without your beard.
Got to catch up, because
Yeah,
it was just perfect time. Just,
yeah. Okay.
amazing. When it came off, she asked me what I thought, and I said, oh my, look, there's me. And I've never shaved a beard off before, and not like had that underbite or overbite where you know, by perspective you don't have a chin. It was just, that was the right time. So
yeah,
thanks.
yeah. And my mustache that I grew for the play and then shaved off, I was having fun growing it, and I was glad when it came off.
Yeah, nice. Yeah.
And if we persuade Henry and Murray to allow us to perform their new play next year, then presumably I will have to grow it back again. But that'll be.
And there's always the
then.
costume tape on.
Yeah, but nah.
It doesn't work as well. Yeah, that's true.
Right. And so my point is that we operate with things. I mean, I'm just looking at my desk. I have a stapler on my desk. I think almost nobody would have had a stapler 120 years ago. Most of the things that are on my desk, like a plastic coffee mug and many other things, would not have been on my desk 120 years ago, nor would they have been imaginable.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because it's the newest addition to my table, but like it's always been there.
Yeah.
It's Chrysocolla.
Yeah. Cool.
I named her Magma Lane, Leine, like magma, and then Pan, which is in the masculine side of. But it's interesting because put these together with just a little splash of red jasper.
Wow.
And it feels like my table is now complete. So when you mentioned, oh, on your table, something plastic or something it's interesting because now I keep them in my backpack while I'm moving around, and people are like, why is your backpack so heavy? Oh, it's like rocks in your pocket. You got to have them. I don't want to float away. But
yeah. So, so anyway, here we are. Probably everybody that's watching this has flown across the United States or to some other city in their lifetime now, and it is a magic trick that is brand new and was totally unreasonable to think about even 120 years ago, which is, in the time of our
your video froze.
So
now you're back. The video froze.
Right. So my grandfather was born in 1875. Another was born in 1900. A grandmother was born in 1898. So these things that we have today could not even have been imagined by our own grandparents, and would have been considered magic if you had talked to them about it at the dinner table. In those days, they would have said you were cuckoo. Right.
That actually brings up a really good point, because I was talking with a dear friend recently, and we both kind of operate bleeding edge, no reference points. I've always said comfortable with the not knowing, but as we were talking, just the concept of no reference points came up, and it's interesting to me because I think that's a way to see magic, because you kind of feel like a heretic, if you're too alone and in that. And it's interesting, the no reference points piece, honestly, when that came up, clarified to me my comfortable with the not knowing. Now it's not so metaphorical, it's not so abstract, it's a thing I do. And so then
it's a thing we all must do.
Yeah, we all must do. And I find then the synchronicities are always around, the tiger, swallowtail, butterfly, or what have you, that you notice, not just see, that actually you get the cascade of ablution tingles kind of thing. And I think they're always around. And when we're, I think, at that no reference points place, we're at our own rhythm. And I think then we can see more clearly all the magic that's always around us, instead of try. It's, you just command it by living it into being. So I'm glad you brought that up.
And if we look at, movies that even came up in the 1950s, the technology that has changed is just remarkable. I mean, just looking at the telephone, for example. I mean, in my childhood, we had to have party lines out in rural Michigan in order to talk to anybody. There was no such thing as a private line. And so
Right.
you just picked up the phone and started to listen to your neighbor's gossip. It was quite enlightening. When I was in the fourth grade, I learned a lot that way.
Yeah. Well, I have a great, you can inhabit the roots, it's like.
Yeah. And so anyway, the changes that have come in the 20th century are just monumental, and they are piling up on us faster and faster and faster. And it is like magic, but nonetheless, we have to find a path for ourselves to live a reasonable life, and live in reason. Okay. So we have to find a path between those opposites. But it is another thing for whoever has opened the chaos in himself. We need magic to be able to receive or invoke the messenger and the communication of the incomprehensible. We recognize that the world comprises reason and unreason, and we also understood that our way needs not only reason, but also unreason. This distinction is arbitrary and depends upon the level of comprehension. But one can be certain that the greatest part of the world eludes our understanding. We must value the incomprehensible and unreasonable equally, although they are not necessarily equal in themselves. A part of the incomprehensible, however, is only presently incomprehensible and might already concur with reasons tomorrow. But as long as one does not understand it, it remains unreasonable. Insofar as the incomprehensible accords with reason, one may try to think it with success, but insofar as it is unreasonable, one needs magical practices to open it up. And so one of the things that's unreasonable is to think that there are no other beings in the universe that have consciousness in the sense that we have consciousness. Not to say that you couldn't find dogs and horses talking with one another on another planet, or that ours will someday talk. They may, and that seems unreasonable to us now, but it can happen with evolution being what it is. And
It's interesting. I mean, that reminds me of what Carl Sagan, I think, said. If there is no life on other planets, then the universe has a vastly terrible waste of space. It's like,
right. And so to think that there is no other living consciousness in the universe is hard to imagine, and yet it may be so. It may be so. In other words, there could have been lots of starts that never led to consciousness, and we don't know. And even in on our planet, we have like 8 million species, something like that. But so far as we know, we're the only species that has the kind of consciousness that we talk about. Others have consciousness based on instinct and can be taught things. For example, chimpanzees can be taught a vocabulary of 450 words, let's say, by us, but that doesn't lead to consciousness per se, at least not in of the kind we're talking about. And so anyway, Jordan, did you want to comment on that further?
well, I was gonna say, I mean, I can't remember the word. It starts with CE, dolphins, orcas, not like cephalopod. I can't remember the name, but they have basically dolphins, orcas, and whales, octopus, and then I always laugh because cats know everything. I even saw a video this last week. There was a home video, and the cat was sitting right in front of the screen, and the owner's watching. But then the dog is over on the couch. You see this tail wagging, and the cat pushes the camera over to show the owner, that the dog is chewing on the remote. I mean, it was just one of those, excuse me, you see what's going on over there? So now do you believe me? The cats. So, I mean, that's good stuff.
Well, and let's suppose that whales and dolphins are as intelligent as we are, perhaps, and able to live in their environment, but they have not yet been able to walk out of their environment and live in our environment. And yet today, I guess I am frozen at the moment. Oh, there.
No, that's you. You're good.
Okay. But just today I saw something saying that we could be living under the ocean in some immediate future time. And while we can't envision that, except maybe for astronauts who are going to Mars as a test of whether they can live together, the reality is that 1,000 years from now, it's very likely that there will be human colonies on Mars, and they'll be managing to live perfectly well.
I hope we take care of the oceans first.
It would be very nice if we did that. Okay, so reading on. The practice of magic consists in making what is not understood understandable in an incomprehensible manner. The magical way is not arbitrary, since that would be understandable, but it arises from incomprehensible grounds. Besides, to speak of grounds is incorrect, since grounds concur with reason. Nor can we speak of the groundless, since hardly anything further can be said about this. The magical way arises by itself. If one opens up chaos, magic also arises. Okay, so this makes me think of our confluence, where we put down a random ground, and then what emerged from that random ground was incomprehensible. Nobody could have predicted it exactly as it emerged. And yet, by the end of the confluence, it had become sacred, and everybody wanted their piece of it. And let's see, I guess I'll pull up a photo of that so people who watch this video would understand what I'm talking about. So that'll take a moment.
My PDF marks are a little wonky. I'm not finding where we are. It just page jumped.
Well, we are at page 404. And I just finished the paragraph. The practice of magic consists in making what is not understood understandable.
Excellent. I'll dial into that.
Okay, let me. Okay, here's the ground that we put down on the first night in Mount Madonna. I'll just pull up a copy of it so we can see this, and then I'll read again this part of the passage that we were in. Just a moment. All right, so, okay, so here's this ground, and at this point in the evening, this is the first evening, about 25 people had randomly put color on this 8-yard long piece of paper, 42 inches wide. And it seems perfectly random, okay? But let me read this paragraph again. The practice of magic consists in making what is not understood understandable in an incomprehensible manner. The magical way is not arbitrary, since that would be understandable, but it arises from incomprehensible grounds. Besides, to speak of grounds is incorrect, since grounds concur with reason. And we were calling this mural at this point the ground. Okay, so it concurs with reason to the extent that the three of us in this picture definitely knew that it would lead to an experience of the collective unconscious. Very definitely. And therefore we knew that it would concur with reason. And then I'll read on. Nor can one speak of the groundless, since hardly anything further can be said about this. The magical way arises by itself. If one opens up chaos, magic also arises. And so, at this point, this is just a piece of paper that everybody had thrown a lot of paint onto. But if I okay, so if I pull up this picture, come on. All right, maybe I'm looking at the wrong thing to pull it up. It does not want to cooperate with me. I'm going to stop the share and then bring.
I love that the whole rocky piece looks like a human created Milky Way. I mean, it's so natural with the community of people that have put it together. It's like the Milky Way. It's like if I feel like if I could see the Milky Way in the day, not at night, then this is the colorized version, I think, of what that magically might be.
Right. And so the magic is what has transpired among these people during the 2 days to this point. And this was not complete by any means. It went another day and a half of work. And it got so at the end of it, people were saying, oh, I want this piece. I want this piece. And Colleen says, no. We're going to cut it up upside down and you get what you get.
You get what you get.
That is your piece.
That's much better.
That is your piece. So reading on. One can teach the way that leads to chaos, but one cannot teach magic. One can only remain silent about this, which seems to be the best apprenticeship. This view is confusing, but this is what magic is like. Where reason establishes order and clarity, magic causes disarray and a lack of clarity. One indeed needs reason for the magical translation of the not understood into the understandable, since only by means of reason can the understandable be created. No one can say how to use reason, but it does arise if one tries to express only what is an opening of chaos means. Okay, so an opening of chaos in that case was giving 10 colors in big jars and letting people spread it around that paper. That was chaos. Okay, so
you know what just came to me?
What?
Chaos is reason. Magic is life.
Yeah. Okay. Or magic is consciousness, maybe.
Yeah.
You know,
So if
as Jung said, the sole purpose of consciousness is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being, right? And
Mhm.
so other creatures exist, they have mere being, but they live on their instincts. And even when you're teaching a chimpanzee a language of 450 words, that can be done, but that doesn't mean they've evolved.
Well,
very
completely. And a question, it's interesting with Jung, Jung's concept that God is capital U, unconscious. A question I've been chewing on for several weeks is, if I were God, I couldn't, and then fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And, I couldn't live, I couldn't love, I couldn't have a best friend, because it's everything, all the omnis, omnipresent,
Mhm.
omniscient, omnipotent, or omnipotent.
Mhm.
If I were God, I couldn't, and then finish fill in the blank. And it's interesting here, the magic is life. I couldn't have consciousness. I couldn't have life. So I like that he's tossing around chaos and magic together. And frankly, it doesn't feel terribly veiled. It's just reason and consciousness.
Okay.
With
And so there's a couple footnotes here. One relates to a phrase, a lack of clarity. The draft continues. Magical practice hence falls into two parts. First, developing an understanding of chaos, and second, translating the essence into what can be understood. And this is exactly what we were doing at Mount Madonna. We were starting with chaos, and we were translating it into something that could be understood.
right.
But it can only be understood in an experiential way. It can't be understood in a rational way. Okay, those of you who didn't attend Mount Madonna, you might think you rationally know what I'm talking about, but you don't. You can't. You cannot. And what that weekend means to those people that were in that photograph just cannot be expressed. And
Well, and I think a good example too, to even approach being there but not being there. When I was on the phone with all of you guys in the award ceremony, I could feel it, but I wasn't there. So I could feel that it was there, but it's almost like I was, 18 steps away from the caldera. I wasn't swimming in it. I wasn't immersed in it. I could feel it, but I wasn't in it. And it's interesting because it's kind of indelible. I remember feeling that I'm not there, I'm near, and I could feel the intensity, but I wasn't immersed in it. It's that, and I think that was pretty interesting, because just the concept of, Viktor Frankl's space between stimulus and response. I wasn't really truly able to respond other than words. I was still swimming in that space between, and you guys were all in the response, there, living, present.
Yeah, we were.
It was quite an interesting experience.
Yeah, and one of the rules is that you can't actually create chaos, because there is no such thing. In nature, everything follows rules. And so even if you give 25 adults bottles of watercolor paint and say, throw it any way you want on this piece of paper, it is not chaos, because the watercolor paint will follow whatever forces are applied to it. Right.
Yeah.
and
splay and curves.
Right. Okay, so then there's one other footnote, which is, but it does arise if one tries to express only what an opening of chaos means. And the footnote reads, the draft continues, reason takes up only a very small share of magic. This will offend you. Age and experience are needed. The rash desirousness and fear of youth, as well as its necessary virtuousness, disturb the secret interplay of God and the devil. You are then all too easily torn to one side or the other, blinded or paralyzed. Okay. So I'm going to be experimenting with this starting next Thursday, because we have a new quarter beginning, and in my school we have something called project-based learning every day during second period. And I'm going to, fortunately, I've done this with 600 children once before, so I'm going to be teaching children who are miscreants, who typically have bad behavior. I'm going to be teaching them that there is no such thing as chaos. And there's one student in my school whose name is actually Chaos, if you can believe that.
You know, parents that make it hard for kids to get through high school just from their name is, I don't know.
That's pretty weird. Okay, so magic is a way of living. If one has done one's best to steer the chariot, and one then notices that a great other is actually steering it, then magical operation takes place. One cannot say what the effect of magic will be, since no one can know it in advance, because the magical is the lawless, which occurs without rules and by chance, so to speak. But the condition is that one totally accepts it and does not reject it, in order to transfer everything to the growth of the tree. Stupidity, too, is part of this, which everyone has a great deal of, and also tastelessness, which is possibly the greatest nuisance. Thus, certain solitude and isolation are inescapable conditions of life for the well-being of oneself and of the other. Otherwise, one cannot sufficiently be oneself. A certain slowness of life, which is like a standstill, will be unavoidable. The uncertainty of such a life will most probably be its greatest burden, but still I must unite the two conflicting powers of my soul and keep them together in the true marriage until the end of my life, since the magician is called Philemon and his wife Bacchus. I hold together what Christ has kept apart in himself and through his example in others, since the more the one half of my being strives toward the good, the more the other half journeys to hell.
That really resonates with his other statement of, for a tree to grow to heaven, its roots must reach to hell.
Absolutely.
Where in a sense, he's not expanding, into the light. His unconscious deepens. His connection to the unconscious deepens the more conscious he becomes, which I love that concept. I mean, because it's real, and it doesn't waste trouble, and it feels, honestly, it feels accurate. The more your spirit grows, well, the deeper your soul is from what you've actually experienced.
And Jonty says, nothing quite as silly as a mortal chaos magician. Well, I plead guilty to that. Because I know that what I teach to most people will seem totally chaotic, but I know that people will learn that way. And so I have to forge ahead into this next quarter with these adolescent children seeing if I can get the penny to drop a little bit. It's going to be an interesting challenge.
Well, I 18 months ago, a year ago, I think you made a comment that sometimes you hear what I say and just receive, because it's as if I'm speaking directly from the arrows or from the unconscious. And it was such an accurate observation. And recently a friend of mine said, she said, sometimes you speak in poetry and I tell you lost me, and I have to kind of back up. But what's interesting about the clarity of those two observations, it's caused me to, in a sense, gear into what is the poetry I speak, what is my fluency, but to slow down and immerse in what's the concept I'm trying to say, instead of painting it, with poetic colors. I don't know. I think I'm running the risk of actually using the English language with some kind of clarity.
Yeah.
It's like,
so Richard says, God is a God of order. He doesn't approve of mundane magic, and it's only with his approval that we accomplish anything. Well, Richard, I'm not sure. I'm not sure you're getting value for money out of this, this
because
series of programs from Dr. Jung, because
I think the approval
we don't know anything about God. I mean, that's the point. Dr. Jung said that the unconscious is really unconscious, and that God is the unconscious. Okay. And so there's your God. Your God may indeed be a God of great reason. And you may rail against magic and whatever you want, but if you get on an airplane, magic is working to your benefit.
Yeah, you're in a chair in the sky. I mean,
right.
It's like,
riding in a lounge chair across the sky.
My perspective, I think too, and I get what Richard's saying, but I don't need permission. I need responsibility for the consequences of what I do. If I screw up, I don't need to wait for someone to tell me I screwed up. I need to realize, I screwed up, turn around, stop, engage it, and address it. And I think the approval piece is, I hope this doesn't sound harsh, but it feels a little juvenile in concept. And it's what I take issue with most ecclesiastical traditions, that the God is outside, when in reality, the God is within. We are each divine. And so I think, I don't need God's permission. I need to make sure that I can live with what I do. And people who need, I think, rules to not do bad things to animals or other people, those are just bad people on a leash. I mean, I don't need that leash. And so pardon going so deeply into just the word permission, God's permission, but I do feel that there's a lack of personal ownership of your life if you need permission. Now, that doesn't mean you don't ask questions. You turn around to your partner and ask her, well, what do you feel about this before I do? So the word permission there to me is always kind of quirky, because it seems to indicate that the God is outside. And I just don't feel that's the case.
Yeah. So let's see. Kathy says chaos magic is a thing. John T says it's all fun and games until someone gets slapped. Thy will be done, sweet Lord, for we are ill-equipped. Kathy, all of my magic is blessed, only godly, loving magic here, all day, every day. John T, nothing as chaotic as thy will be done. It certainly makes it easier to accept terrible things, though. And of course, that's what religions do, is make us accept terrible things. For example, death, we go to a funeral to accept that.
And the hidden one in religions, the
Right.
terrible thing, loss of never seeing self, never
And
living.
Kathy says, I am blessed with the Holy Spirit. Richard, I can blow hundreds of spirits out in my breath. Jonty, see you tomorrow night, late to church. Okay, so Richard is off. And Kathy says, I'm divinely guided. Who then is to be the arbiter of morality, says Dionysus. There is no one who is the arbiter of morality. Okay, there is chaos and experience. For example, I have one young man who is in the 7th grade, and he swears like a drunken sailor, and he often uses inappropriate language that refers to race. And last week, he managed to get himself slapped across the face pretty hard by one of the other kids. The other kid ended up in our version of detention, but the kid that was slapped had an experience that really was a valuable experience. And hopefully that will give him guidance to change his ways.
It's interesting you say that, because it's really apropos with some things going on here. A friend of mine had a feral cat that showed up on the farm and was terrorizing her cat. And so, we ordered a cage, and another couple said, well, if you catch the wrong cat, make sure you kick the cage a couple of times and roll it over, because that way that cat will remember to not go in that cage again. And it was interesting to me, because at first I thought they were saying, kick the cat. And I'm like, well, I don't think I can do that. That's cruel. But then when they reframed it and made it more like, oh, I'm going to put the cat on this roller coaster of kick, roll. I went, oh, okay. And then it made total sense. But it's like the kid getting slapped, that's the cat getting rolled in the cage. So it doesn't do that again. So in a sense, there's learning, and that's to me not a leash. It puts an indelible mark on, oh, I see what's going to happen if I apply for this Darwin Award just like this again. So I may get a different Darwin Award, but I'm not getting that one. So
yeah. Well, I imagine that's true. And so anyway, we live and learn. I am learning in my environment, which is much beyond what I was expecting it to be, but nonetheless, I am enjoying it.
mm-hmm.
I can't help myself. I'm sorry. Okay.
I don't know. In the last several weeks, it's just I love my life. I mean, it just kind of bubbles up, and I kind of giggle, which is funny, because then I laugh because it's funny that I giggled. I mean, so it's a childlike thing going on, but I think that's the deepening. That's the soul part, laughing.
Yeah.
Rather than with me. So
I mean, some of this I may start reading to these kids, because I'm now required to visit them every period that they're in detention. And so I may start reading these one paragraph at a time.
Well, it's interesting if you do that, because if they're in detention, they're pretty much alone. So are they lonely or are they in solitude? And I
well,
love
teachers are required to give them work, okay, which they're
Yeah.
required to do. That's all very rational, okay. And
the idle hands thing. So yeah, don't let them just stew. But it's interesting to me though, the slap in the face of the quote, if they're lonely when they're alone, then that means they're really horrible company. And then sometimes with the work, they may be able to realize that I would rather solitude, which means I like myself, love myself, not in an egomaniacal way, a center way. But if they're lonely, that's kind of the needy pining. And that's then often the source of the trouble they're making. They're acting out. And it's really an expression of a lack of love by
right.
basically, spewing the darkness out on people. I mean, and negativity kind of darkness, not death. Anyway.
Okay. So here, Dr. Jung, in this next section, Dr. Jung is referring to the month of the twins, and what he's referring to is the zodiacal calendar, which is actually 24,000 plus years long. Every zodiacal month, of which there are 12, as we know, is about 2,000 years long. And we've been in the age of Pisces for about 2,000 years, since the time of Christ. And we're now entering a new zodiacal month, which is the age of Aquarius, the new age of Aquarius. And this is the age represented by the Water Bearer Award. If you don't know what that is, you can see the Water Bearer Award ceremony on this YouTube channel. Go to videos and you will see the 2023 Water Bearer Award ceremony.
And that zodiacal calendar, to me, what's interesting is moving from Pisces, which is both masculine and feminine. I mean, it's Oshun, the ocean. It's also Poseidon, the formative oceanic qualities. Water, water, water. What happens is an Aquarius has the memory lineage of that water, except in the air. And the magic is then to command condensation. You can walk around with a wonderfully clean, empty vessel, travel light, and as soon as you need the water, you basically invoke, the so mote it be, invoke the water to condensate and fill the vessel, which is the water bearer. And then that's the magic of Aquarius being an air sign, after the water. So it's taking the parts apart, but remembering the other parts that were there. So there's no loss. It's just a change of perspective and personal modality, as it were.
All right. So let me read on, because I've now given you the preface of what a month is when Dr. Jung is talking about it here. When the month of the twins had ended, the men said to their shadows, "You are I," since they had previously had their spirit around them as a second person. Thus the two became one, and through this collision, the formidable broke out. Precisely that spring of consciousness that one calls culture, and which lasted until the time of Christ. But the fish indicated that the moment when what was united split, according to the eternal law of contrast, into an underworld and an upper world, if the power of growth begins to cease, then the united falls into its opposition, into its opposites. Christ sent what is beneath to hell, since it strives toward the good. That had to be. But the separated cannot remain separated forever, It will be united again, and the month of the fish will soon be over. We suspect and understand that growth needs both, and hence we keep good and evil close together, because we know that too far into the good means the same as too far into evil. We keep them both together. All right.
That
Now,
reminds
yeah, go
Jung's
ahead.
quote of Jung's quote. I saw this last week. All addictions are bad, whether it be alcohol or narcotics or, and here's the important part, idealism. And so It's interesting to me that we're experiencing this kind of, I think, crack level addiction to reason and certainty in society these days. And that's an addiction to idealism, which frankly is an adolescent concept. I mean, the pesky idealism of you got to be right. You got to be, there's no more striving, or actually Richard's comment comes to mind, if there's no more permission.
What I'm seeing in education right now is total idealism, total rationality. Everything you teach this because it leads you to this, which leads you to this, and it's almost a religion among teachers and administrators that you have to stick with that reason. And yet what we're missing is this unreason. We're really missing that.
Yeah, I love the fact that you're, sticking with the reason is actually really intensely unreasonable. It's
Amen.
just simple than that.
It's gotten so reasonable that my job is all about filling out a huge database on students and keeping track of all the data events that happen in their lives. And we're not teaching students well, I don't think, when we do that, or at least some students. Some students may take to it normally. Okay. Some people may take to it normally, and I did. I accepted all the rationality of the Marines. I accepted all the rationality of going to law school and business school, and I didn't understand the irrationality of my liberal arts education, which was before those things. Okay, it was quite irrational, but the point is that I've been able to maintain my equilibrium throughout my life when everything else was going to hell, and it wasn't easy, but I have kept my sanity because I did have that liberal arts education, which
the ability to stay the course through the passage, and the whole, calm seas never a good sailor made. So life is not a calm sea, but when you learn to self-regulate in the storms, I mean, the old Malay proverb of, trees with strong roots laugh in storms. Thanks for the free power wash. It's like, and you clean stuff out.
And Clarissa Pinkola Estes had a wonderful essay, which you can find on YouTube here, which is, I think it's called Great Ships. And it's a story about great ships, and it has in it the idea that great ships may be beautiful and safe when they're in the harbor, but that is not why they are made. Great ships are safe and beautiful in a harbor, but that is not why they're made. Okay, they are made to be at sea and to be seaworthy, and for those who man her to be seaworthy. Right.
Well, that's also John. Is it John Sheff, or said, what is it? It's the same concept. He said ships are safe in harbor, but that's not what ships. That's not what ships are for.
Right.
Which makes a whole big allusion, ALLUSION, to the vessel itself. You know, we're safe in harbor, but when that's not what we're made for. We go into life and we live it.
Okay.
John Shedd, SHEDD, I think.
Let me just see if I can find this quickly, if I can find a link to it. Okay. You were made for this is what the essay called. Okay, right. Okay, I'll just read this essay right now because it's quite good. And it's by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. I'm going to give everybody the link to it right now so that you can access it. I'll put it in the YouTube channel, and then I will do a reading, and I will give it to you as well, Jordan. This is the okay. Now I'm going to go back, and where is it? Okay, this is by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. Ours is not the task of fixing the entire world all at once, but of stretching out to mend the part of the world that is within our reach. Any small, calm thing that one soul can do to help another soul, to assist some portion of this poor, suffering world, will help immensely. It is not given to us to know which acts or by whom will cause the critical mass to tip toward the enduring good. What is needed for dramatic change is an accumulation of acts, adding to, adding more, continuing. We know that it does not take everyone on earth to bring justice and peace, but only a small determined group who will not give up during the first, second, or 100th gale. One of the most common and powerful actions you can do to intervene in a stormy world is to stand up and show your soul. Soul on deck shines like gold in dark times. The light of the soul throws sparks, can send up flares, builds signal fires, causes proper matters to catch fire. To display the lantern of soul in shadowy times like these, to be fierce and to show mercy toward others. Both are acts of immense bravery and greatest necessity. Struggling souls catch fire from other souls who are fully lit and willing to show it. If you would help to calm the tumult, this is one of the strongest things you can do. There will always be times when you feel discouraged. I too have felt despair many times in my life, but I do not keep a chair for it. I will not entertain it. It is not allowed to eat from my plate. That in that spirit, I hope you will write this on your wall. When a great ship is in harbor and moored, it is safe. There can be no doubt. But that is not what great ships are built for.
Yeah. And that really opens up that ship and harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are for. That really, really opens that up.
Right. Right. Okay. So I have to read a footnote. I have to go back to the phrase. Thus the two became one, and through this collision, the formidable broke out. Precisely that spring of consciousness that one calls culture, and which lasted until the time of Christ. Now the footnote reads, the references to the astrological conception of the Platonic month or eon of Pisces, which is based on the precession of the equinoxes. Each Platonic month consisting of one zodiacal sign and lasts approximately 2,300 years. Jung discusses the symbolism attached to this in Ion, Collected Works 6, Chapter 6. He notes that around 7 BC, there was a conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter, representing a union of extreme opposites, which would place the birth of Christ under Pisces. Pisces, Latin for fishes, is known as the sign of the fish and is often represented by two fish swimming in opposite directions. On the Platonic months, see Alice Howell, Jungian Synchronicity and Astrological Signs and Ages. Jung started studying astrology in 1911 in the course of his study of mythology and learned to cast horoscopes. Jung to Freud, May 8th, 1911, from the Freud-Jung letters. In terms of Jung's sources for the history of astrology, he cited Auguste Boucher Leclerc, L'Astrologie Grecque, on 9 occasions in his later work. Okay, so Jung was into astrology. Okay, now there are a couple of other footnotes here. It will be, but the separated cannot remain separated forever. It will be united again, and the month of the fish will soon be over. Footnote 274. This refers to the end of the Platonic month of Pisces and the beginning of the Platonic month of Aquarius. The precise dating of this is uncertain. In Ion, 1951, Jung noted, astrologically, the beginning of the next eon, according to the starting point you select, falls between AD 2000 and 2200. So we're in this transition. And this is in Collected Works 9.2, paragraph 149, note 88. And there's another footnote here. Because we know that too far into the good means that the same is too far into evil, we keep them both together. And the footnote reads, in Ion, Jung wrote, quote, if as seems probable, the Ion of the fishes is ruled by the archetypal motif of the hostile brothers, then the approach of the next Platonic month, namely Aquarius, will constellate the problem of the union of opposites. It will then no longer be possible to write off evil as more privatio boni. Its real existence will have to be recognized. Collected Works 9, paragraph 142. Now, privatio boni is a concept that was used by the Catholic Church for centuries. And it says that there is no such thing as evil, there is only good. And the problem is that that's not true. I mean, okay, privatio boni says there's no such thing as evil. It is the evil is the privation of good. Okay, and so what it's saying is that if you didn't have your mother's milk, the privation of that good thing that you needed was evil. Okay, well. Okay.
Well, and it's interesting that I've been wrestling with this concept recently, kind of a lot, of good and evil, because I play with the both and all the time. And is there really evil? I don't have a response or an answer, but Robin Williams, people who are mean or cruel, maybe they're the ones who need more love. Now, I don't want to be naive in that and submit myself to torture that way, but at the same time, meanness and cruelness, from my experience, have always indicated the intensity of how weak somebody actually is, because they've never been loved. And I think what's interesting is the evil. I saw a quote last week of, there is no evil. Evil is someone who has just intensely never had their story listened to. And I find then that plays into the narcissus, staring yourself in the face. And the only thing you can see is you, because you've never actually inhabited you so that you can actually see someone else. And then that is a seed of leading to catalyzing then what we call evil. So there's just so much, I think, in this, the good and evil, and not so much existentially, does it exist or not? How it presents, and then that dials us back into that slap in the face example you had of, there's a consequence, and that's a little tiny truth. It's not good or evil. It's true that, and I think it's such an important piece, I think, to understand, so that it's not, I'm not going to do that because it's evil. It's, no, I'm not going to do that because it's not resonant with me. That creates an interference pattern, personally and with someone else. And it reminds me of, people who have a hard time saying no. Just go back to age 4. A 4-year-old doesn't say no. They go, Well, that's fair. You get it. Not a priority. So, I mean, there's just a lot of going on, I think, in the good and evil that actually can be actionably mined in life, instead of, that's good, okay, I want it. That's evil, okay, that's bad. It's deeper than that.
Well, it's I have to say that this passage is bringing up a lot of things in my psyche right now, because I am actually experiencing these children who have been deprived in one way or another.
That's a perfect word.
Deprived in by not having a father in many cases, or deprived in the sense that their mother is too good and their father is too much the opposite. Okay, so
monster of a father, doormat of a mother, and actually then the deprived makes people depraved. It
we're
just
depraved
change one letter.
On account of we're deprived. That's from West Side Story. We're depraved on account of we're deprived. So anyway,
can I say something?
Yeah, please do. Go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning.
The way that I interpret it is totally different, because the Bible does say that, well, not the Bible, just every Christian in general believes that, we're not just saints and sinners. We are sinners, right?
Yeah.
That's why we go to congregate every Sunday to repent for our sins. So the evil is within us, just as the God is within us, so is the evil. And going back into, theological stuff, going back into
Amela,
the Gita. Yes.
We cut off at the time that you said that's why we go to, and then there was a hiccup in the internet. So could you start from that point?
Oh, sure. Yes.
We're all sinners. That's why we go to. But
Oh, yeah. That's why, people congregate to their religious temple to repent for their sins.
mhm,
And so when we hear the story of Abraham's children, and why he said to his son, even though you are absolutely nothing like me, I'd rather sacrifice this goat than sacrifice you. Because it takes a lot of courage to accept that sometimes the things that we do are not necessarily good. Maybe, just like, I don't want to get political, but it always goes back to
yeah,
just
sure.
like Vladimir Putin, who said to Ukraine, let's go to war right now. And there are many reasons why he wanted to go to war. There was suspicion of Nazis. There was suspicion that it was going to be an epic world war. So now let's all go back together and become Soviets, and bring our economy together. So that was a very evil decision that he made for many people, because in reality many people have died and many people have lost their lives and their plans for their future. So what he did was evil, right? And so what is the good part that he did from all of that? Some people would say absolutely nothing, because what is good in a war, you know?
Mhm.
Um, but again, there is always going to be an evil inside of us, but it takes a lot of courage to face that evil, just like to face your shadow. It takes a lot of courage to say, you know what? Maybe what I did was really harsh and mean. Maybe what I did was not the right thing, or maybe I could have done this better, or like in a neutral way. But not many people, that's why it's considered a mastery. No. And I feel like that's why so many people go into meditation and go into the Eastern religions to seek within themselves, because um, they want to discipline themselves to retrain their mind and their habits by restraining themselves from, or restricting themselves from, certain things that they're doing or that they've done, and trying to figure out where is this evil coming from.
Yeah, sure.
But
I
as you
appreciate
said,
you
it
brought
is
that
there
up.
there is an equilibrium. There is a balance. We always have to be good and we have to be kind of evil, because we don't want to be pushovers. And that's why the ego is a good thing in a way.
Mhm.
Well, I appreciate you brought that up, because I personally, I make a distinction between repentance and I don't apologize for my life. I'm not, going in to ask permission, so to speak. And I think when you bring that up, it goes back to when the month of, Jung said, when the month of the twins had ended, the men said, so I'm going to just change it. The people said to their shadows, you are I. Since they had previously had their spirit around them as a second person, there's that God is outside of most ecclesiastical traditions, instead of the God is you, is within. Thus the two became one, and through this collision, the formidable broke out, precisely that spring of consciousness that one calls culture, and which lasted until the time of Christ. And what's interesting then is civilization disconnected from nature, our nature causes uncivilized behavior. And then that leads then back into the evil piece. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I think people, instead of blindly going to repent, you're not apologizing for living. You're having a conversation with your divinity. And it's not asking for permission. It's self-reflection. And then that leads to increased self-worth. The value you can provide with what you're in service to in the world increases. And so I love that you brought that up, because I think there's a whole lot there that a lot of people go through the motions. But when you inhabit and live it and don't apologize for your life, but you're having that self-reflective conversation with your own divinity and yourself, that's good stuff.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Let me carry on here. But we thus lose direction, and things no longer flow from the mountain to the valley, but grow quietly from the valley to the mountain. That which one can no longer prevent or hide is our fruit. The flowing stream becomes a lake and an ocean that has no outlet unless its water rises to the sky as steam and falls from the clouds as rain. While the sea is a death, it is also the place of rising. Such as Philemon, who tends his garden. Our hands have been tied, and each must sit quietly in his place. He rises invisibly and falls as rain on distant lands. The water on the ground is no cloud, which should rain. Only pregnant women can give birth, not those who have not yet conceived. Okay, there's a couple of footnotes here. The hibernal rains began with Christ. He taught mankind the way to heaven. We teach the way to earth. Hence, nothing has been removed from the gospel, but only added to it. Okay, very good.
And yeah, that goes right with the, repentance, not apologizing for life piece.
Yeah.
Nothing has been removed. You're enhancing, reinforcing, strengthening the value of the life.
Okay, the draft continues. Our striving focused on sagacity and intellectual superiority, and we hence developed all our cleverness. But the extraordinary extent of stupidity inherent in all men was disregarded and denied. But if we accept the other in us, we also evoke the particular stupidity of our nature. Stupidity is one of man's strange hobby horses. There is something divine about it, and yet something of the megalomania of the world, which is why stupidity is really large. It keeps away everything that could induce us to intelligence. It leaves everything not understood, which is not naturally supposed to demand understanding. The particular stupidity occurs in thought and in life. Somewhat deaf, somewhat blind, it brings about necessary fate and keeps from us the virtuousness coupled with rationality. It is when separate and it is what separates and isolates the mixed seeds of life, affording us thus with a clear view of good and evil and of what is reasonable and what not. But many people are logical in their lack of reason. So what I'm hearing Jung say here is that all of us aren't perfect and never will be. I mean, we can't incorporate all good and all evil. Okay, we have to have something that counterbalances. So, even the Godfather had a family and believed strongly in his family. And so, or believes strongly in his family. And so on balance, there can be people who balance out as evil. Okay. But in the world of humanity, all things balance out. Okay. That's the point. And we, as I said at the beginning, represent the hopes and fears of all of our ancestors. We are the symbol of it. And so, whatever you're doing, whatever you're thinking of doing, you are the example of what all your ancestors brought to the world. Okay. And many of our ancestors are the same. I mean, there's a calculation that says that everybody in the Western world is, so essentially all Caucasians are related to Alexander the Great. Okay, in other words, if you go back that many generations, we all have some bit of Alexander the Great in our DNA. Okay. And it's probably true that everybody in the world now has some part of Alexander the Great in them, because Alexander the Great went across the world, and I'm sure he sowed many wild oats in that time.
So then we probably all also have some Lilith in this. So that means we're good. That means we're a shiro and a hero together.
Yeah. And so the significance of it is not that we're all alike, but we all have the same basic structure to us. And when we're talking about good and evil, probably we should do it with the binoculars of several hundred years looking back, okay? Because we cannot predict the future. We cannot force the future. The future will be, and we don't know how things are going to work out, but we can look backward very definitely and see what worked and what didn't work. And when I look back at just my grandparents' legacy, okay, I can see I can see how my grandmothers were in the world and how they kept hearth and home. And women often rail against the fact that they are called upon to keep hearth and home, but that's what our species does. And it's hard to, if you want to do something beyond that, then you have to do that typically in addition. And at the same time, go ahead.
I would say everyone does. And I think it's right now, I think we're driving out of the early 20th century sexism that made traditional gender roles a thing. Because in 1800s, if you're living on a farm, everyone's doing everything. I mean, the whole, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, fire sale wash of, don't just indiscriminately toss something. Well, that comes from the actual fact that the bath in the cauldron or the big kettle, where they start the fire and warm the water, it goes in pecking order, age and experience and value from oldest to youngest. And the last one to be bathed, so probably to increases their immune system, was the infant. Well, they're fresh out of the womb. So if they drop underwater, they're just hanging out, like the cover of the Nirvana album, and they don't care. They're not going to breathe. And they're really kind of not even holding their breath. They're just floating under there, like, oh, I remember this. Well, the problem is the water by that time is murky. You wouldn't see them. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, is to reach into that mess, make sure there's not, treasure in there, the infant, before you go toss it in the river, and then the baby goes floating away. So I think the traditional gender roles are that kind of baby in the bathwater, where I think, pull them out, like even in the other panels where we're changing the pronouns from, men to people or humanity or, us or them, and not he or she. So that gets that languaging out, because I think even here, we're reading this with the integrity of, this is what Jung wrote, so we're reading it. But the fact that house and home, hearth and home, I mean, as a former architect of 3 decades, the hearth is the heart of the home. And so in that sense, that's where the follows. The sacred staff, boom, went down. And
that's
this
where the fire is.
Yeah, that's where your fire is. So it's not really terribly figurative. It's pretty literal, that here is the place of my eternal embers.
Right.
And I put that outside, inside the home, because then the home is then the temple of you, the psyche turned inside out. I mean, this is why people have collections. You look at the stuff on your shelf. I don't think they're dead. They're talismanic. And they're things that were or still are special,
And cause and have meaning to you.
Yeah. We populate our homes with our collections that way. And then what happens is, when you go around in dust, you're freshening up your magic.
Absolutely. Kathy, did you want to comment on this? You uncloaked for the moment.
Well, I've been listening, almost from the beginning this morning. Good conversation. I think a lot of really relatable things have come up this morning. I felt the knee-jerk impulse, or I was compelled to come on when you made mention a while ago about, the kids you've been working with, and we were talking about evil and good, and you made the comment, whether it's because you didn't have a father. Right, Monkey?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that brought together and tied together all of my thoughts in regard to, all of your topics, and even past that. Because I pretty much, didn't, and don't have to really all go into that, just that does apply to me, and it is triggering, and the trigger has proved to be, even though I'm 60 years old, very much alive and well. And even though, I've done a lot of work, I've worked on stuff my whole life, and but I made the comment in the comments that sometimes evil is I think a symptom of a wound. Hurt people.
Yeah.
And hurt people who haven't done their work, I think continuously and increasingly hurt people. Some of them are serial killers.
Yep.
Some of them are just bad students. And I think that I think one of the tie-ins that is really relatable and available to all of us is 2 things: vulnerability, and always more than 2 things, just the ability to show up and say, I'm a wounded healer. I absolutely deeply wounded healer. And over the summer in one of my jobs, it was greatly reflected to me, which came up for me when Amela was on, because she was talking about, this is why we go on Sunday, and maybe it's why we show up here on Sundays, because not only do we need our conscience, which I wrote in the comments about, knock, knock, your shadow's calling. So
Mhm.
how do we know? How do I know if I'm good? How do I know if I'm evil?
Mhm.
As a relatively sane person, let's just say, let's just put some gray parameters around that, because there's a fine line there for all of us between
Right.
being so and not being so.
Mhm.
It's sometimes how we reflect each other.
Mhm.
I got a lot of feedback on the job, like, look, as a Pilates instructor, teaching 12 people at a time,
Mhm.
as a hot-headed woman, as a wounded child, as an experienced, pretty much master of my craft at this point.
Mhm.
I went through a period where I was really super lippy, and it was just like coming out of me.
Mhm.
Like my really deep, snarky truths. Like,
Mhm.
what would you say as a junior high student if nobody ever could pull you into the assistant principal's office again? What would you say to that jerk?
Mhm.
Kind of truths. Okay.
Say
And
that again. Say that again, because I didn't quite follow you.
it was the things that were coming out of me verbally.
No, but
Uh,
what about being called into the principal's office?
uh-huh.
Say that again.
Well, I kind of speak from a muse place, so I don't know if I can requote myself.
Well, I'll requote you, because that
Um,
resonates.
actually, if you could just bear with me, that would be better
Yeah.
for me.
Okay. Go ahead. Carry on, and then
Let me just say I was being very sophomoric, where the rubber hit the road. Okay.
Mhm.
I didn't have a filter. I was speaking as though I could never get called into vice principal's office again, and I was that junior high student. Like, if I could just say what I really want to say to that person without thinking about it or its ramifications or who they are or where they're coming from. Okay.
Right.
So basically, I was speaking from a wounded place. And I ended up in the hot seat more than once. And I laughed because that was a nervous little outburst. I mean, I almost lost my job. I'm being
Mhm.
totally perfectly honest with you guys. I am being vulnerable.
Yeah, sure.
And it was through that feedback, through that reflection.
Yeah.
Because when I'm wrong, and my conscience, had been bothering me, and I knew things weren't going well, and I was on a roll. I wasn't able to contain myself.
I
But
mean, how much can you contain yourself, Kathy? When you're dealing with other customers and, I mean, Pilates is not just an exercise, it's not just like, let's make a cake together. Here are the instructions, you can't go wrong. Pilates, you really have to connect with your instructor. So I can imagine if they're not connecting with you in Pilates, because it's also sort of like a Reiki key thing, which I think you may also have mentioned that you do. If they're not connecting with you, then they're just there just to show and say, I do Pilates with Kathy. They're not really doing what they're
Right.
supposed to do.
Right.
Well, one of the other things that has come up this morning that was a tie-in, thank you for that. I mean, I feel like you just had my back there, so thank you very much. But what it came down to, Amela, is I don't have that luxury.
Mhm.
I don't. I teach I have a private Pilates studio. I don't have to let anybody in my home into my private studio that I don't want to work with, and that's one-on-one. And that's been, great lessons over the last 23 years as well. But when I'm working with a room full of 12 and I teach 4 or 5 classes in a room, that's 48 to 60 people.
Mhm.
And there's no way I can know how I'm being received. And so I had to be able to hone it in and realize, knock, knock, my shadow was calling. I had to get back in. I had to get back to work because I wasn't doing what I needed to be doing in terms of, heightening that awareness, or just realizing that unbeknownst to me, the egg timer had rung. I didn't plan it, but my behavior really showed it, and the feedback made it super, super evident.
Yep.
Well, and
And
your vulnerability there, birth was the birthplace of your courage to say, I am going to treat my wound so I don't bleed on people who haven't hurt me.
Well, thanks. And what I did was, I mean, even at the table with my superiors, okay, in the hot seat, they're, I mean, they know me as, I'm a nut. I teach with a lot of finesse and flair and humor and whatnot. They also knew, based on the feedback they were getting about me, that something was up. But they don't have, we don't have this, okay? I don't have this with them.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe one word would be trust.
Yeah.
Which could be in flux. I don't have trust. And so when I was asked at one point, what's triggering you? I did not share.
Mm-hmm.
But what I did do all the while was just cop to it. All I had to say was, thank you for the feedback. I take it to heart. I'm sorry I've hurt people. I'm going to get in there and do my work. You have my solemn vow.
Mm.
There was
imagine
no.
you were a man. Would Jordan, would you have, I'm sorry to cut you off, Kathy, but Jordan, would you have responded in the same way? I mean, not you essentially, but as a man, not many, I feel like this is the anima and the animus in how we handle the dilemmas in society.
I appreciate the question. And honestly, that's why I've stopped saying anima and animus. The sexist. To me, it's generative and formative. And we've all each have both. And I would have responded the same way. Because, for example, even recently with a friend, I was at a line. And I didn't wait for them to say, that was all wrong. I felt it. I mean, it was ooky in my gut. And I turned around, stopped, refocused the conversation and said, okay, I just screwed up. So this is what I feel about that. And then we talked for 10 seconds. That's all it really took. And then she's like, okay, can we move on now? I just said, yes. So what happened is it was stop, drop, and address the trouble. Don't try to hide under some Cretaceous sunflower leaf and hope it'll go away. You just did that. And it's beyond responsibility. And to me, there's a dignity and difference. I didn't like what I did. What happened is I didn't like what I did. And so ownership. There's partnership, not ownership, but ownership of your own stuff. And so, yes, I would have responded because what I think is Kathy's expressing that, hi, I'm human. And that hurt other people. And whether it was me screwing up or not screwing up, it doesn't matter. Someone else was involved. And in that case, I think the word I'm feeling from what Kathy is saying is lack of connection. And that, to me, disconnect, that's unsettling. I don't know. I don't care where I am in my psychological evolution. If there's a disconnection, that's going to get me.
In psychology, it's actually dissociation. When we, are no longer embodying to all of the integrated selves as an adult human being who is self-actualized, who actually is very mature, who is spiritually wise, who is incredibly spiritually available, this person can fall into that chasm.
I make a distinction between disassociation and diconnection because my experience has been that disassociation is an action, usually by omission, but someone actually pulls away unconsciously because they're disassociating with a triggered experience. Where to me, disconnection is I'm floating, I'm not connected, and it's not an abuse generated thing. It's I'm disconnected, which means I am internally not focused. I am internally not literally connected. and I am then afloat. So the question then, am I lonely or in solitude? But disassociation to me comes from actual, visceral experiences in life, which I think they're both valid. And like, for example, you disagreed when I said, validation is just for parking. Now, that's my joke, but I will tell you, when I received the Water Bearer Award, you want to talk about validation. That was not for parking. The gratefulness I felt. So, I think we kind of hot potato these ideas, but I think disassociation is triggered. Disconnection is a state, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with an experience. And then they both can blend in a way. So I want to distinguish them, but at the same time, I don't want to disparage either by saying they're completely different. They're cousins, as it were. I mean, if that resonates, because I think that, I don't know, simply put, disassociation is a triggered state, and disconnection is just simply a state. From my perspective. And the thing is,
you want to respond to that, Kathy, or?
No,
Okay.
I want Mela to talk more about what she was referring to, because I'm wondering if that's like an experiential point of view. Sometimes it's cultural. The male female roles in society is something that I could soapbox on and banter and would love to talk about for hours. I think a lot has happened there. We've done a lot of it to ourselves.
No, it's just there's this one story. I will sum it up in one story. Okay, so I come from a background of social sciences and humanities too. So let's take that into consideration. So there was this socio-psychological experiment where they did this research firm. They did a survey, and then they went out and confirmed whether or not this was true. So they asked men and women, how likely are you to ask for directions? And so women are more likely to ask for directions, whereas men are more likely to get lost. So, it's something like that.
Yeah. One of the things that I want to be wrapping this up fairly soon, but one of the things I wanted to observe with Kathy is one of the things I've been considering doing, because we have in this school that I'm in this second period that can be used for something, lump, whatever it is. What I've considered doing in lieu of Pilates, because this is because what we have right now is there's a lot of fighting going on between the kids, okay? And they aren't kids from a background that will even hear me if I say anything about Pilates, right? So what I've been thinking of doing is suggesting to the principal that we introduce an Aikido or some other martial art.
Aikido, definitely.
Yeah,
looks smooth. It's the most rough and tumble, slamming you down on them, except it's sword fighting without a sword, little circles, and it's the ultimate strategy of flow like water and wind. I mean, it's nature itself. That's perfect.
And so instead of fighting the kids wanting to fight, go to the kids and say, well, if you want to fight, let us teach you how to fight.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I taught martial arts to underprivileged kids 3 summers in a row at a university. There's a program called YOU, Youth Opportunities Unlimited. And these kids had all failed out of school that year. And what it was they were scholarshiped to retake all the classes and keep going as if the failure never happened. Well, the dean cornered me one day and said, why are we teaching these street urchins to fight? And I went, well, first off, they're not urchins. Yes, they're street kids, but don't disparage them. Now, have you seen their fighting? It's really intensely sloppy.
Mm-hmm.
We should fix that, because what happens is then they will not be fighting inner civil wars with themselves, because their body will keep the score of it's self-regulated, and they get themselves as like a gemstone. Their crystalline lattice structure becomes a resonance instead of them being an interference pattern with themselves. So I find bringing martial arts into especially kids who are at-risk kids, what happens is it gives them a place to put all that octane that they aren't putting anywhere except into outside. They can plug back into themselves. And honestly, when those kids turned and they started to become themselves, you want to talk about unlimited zeal. These kids were superheroes. I mean, they didn't need capes. All their grades went up. They started tutoring other kids.
Mm-hmm.
They were actually able to engage their natural talents and start developing them into abilities. And so Aikido would be perfect for them. I mean, I feel, because
I'd
honestly,
like to chime in.
Yes, please.
Um,
I wanted your view about it.
I feel very strongly about this, and I'm actually like sweaty palms, spiritually inspired, right? I teach Zoom classes twice a week, mat classes. I would recommend that you start them with Pilates for 6 weeks. I would get on Zoom with them for free. If it's during a time I'm available, I will offer myself to them and you for 20 minutes. They don't need 60. There is nothing like Pilates to show you what you're made of. All the girls don't want to do Aikido. None of the boys want to be fighting all the time. When you have a baseline though, and I'm not dissing martial arts, okay? Let's just not even go there in our minds, guys.
You're what about martial arts?
I have the utmost respect, but the baseline that Pilates offers to any sport makes most sports less prone to injure a body. Something you can always go back to. You can do it by yourself. You can do it at home. Mat work is incredibly humbling. There's an exercise I have renamed the Humbler, amongst other things that you don't want to hear in public.
I love
Joe Pilates said, teach the children.
Yeah.
And I believe that if our politicians did Pilates, there would be no war, because when you're really in your body, you can't hurt people. You can't, because you know for a solid fact what living in a home, in a temple, this temple that goes into the temple is up to.
Okay.
I mean, it's just in your face.
So I have a couple issues I have to raise with you. One is very few people in our staff would understand what Pilates is and is about. Okay, what I'm interested in is the spiritual learning of Aikido. Okay, not the fighting. Okay, but
more Shiba, the art of peace.
Yeah, and how to live life. I mean, and so if I just say martial arts to our principal, I know he'll get it immediately. He'll know what I'm talking about. He may not do it, but he'll at least understand it. Okay, understand what it could be. And if I mention Pilates to the same individual, I think there's very little chance that I'm not saying you're not right, okay? I'm only saying that how will I convince someone that is a thing that I should try to do in,
Well, Joe Pilates himself did not call Pilates Pilates. Pilates was a man. Okay.
Okay.
Pilates is a method. Joe
Mhm.
Pilates referred to Pilates as contrology, the art of controlling the body with the mind. He said our bodies should be at the whim of the brain, not the other way around. So Pilates is a discipline.
Well,
And if you can't get an administrator to agree with a self-discipline, that's what martial arts are about, right? But like, you might be surprised. I think you're making assumptions. I think you should do your own science and your own test, run them both by him with an open mind and see how he responds. Pilates has hit critical mass.
What I think is
okay.
interesting about
I mean,
Pilates, a friend of mine is a martial artist as well.
Yeah.
And
I
pretty,
mean,
pretty badass. He was disparaging Pilates. It was like 18 months ago. Just he was going off dissing Pilates, and I didn't say a damn word. I went and bought him a gift certificate, and I said, so I want your money where your mouth is, dude. So here, and he went once. He came back. He was like, oh my God, that stuff's got teeth. I'm like, yeah. So there you go. Because Pilates, like you said, keyword baseline. It is a wonderful foundation for, I don't like the word control, so I use the word navigation, but same concept, navigating with the heart and the mind, because I think what happens is then the heart fuels the mind and they have the heart of the matter as discernment. And then your body is not controlled, you're navigating. And I think
okay. So here's the thing, Kathy. You have to educate me better before I can make such a suggestion.
I understand.
Okay.
I understand, because pitching to the professionals is an art for sure.
Right. And I've never taken a Pilates class. I have no intention of doing it. The reason is that my body is racked. Okay. I have 3 joint replacements in my legs. Both my shoulders have been rehung. And I've had multiple internal surgeries.
Now you would need a reformer, Skip, but the kids, the thing is all you need for the kids is either floor space or a desktop or even chairs. I mean,
okay, but
but
the question I'm going to be asked, because I'm asking you.
No, I get it.
Why is that not gym? I mean, because they do have gym classes and such.
Well, Pilates isn't gym for a lot of reasons. Okay. Pilates is, we can talk about this.
We're not having this argument right now. Okay. What I'm saying is you have to convince
me. I surrender.
But
gym is average, basic.
Okay, but wait a minute.
Pilates
we're off the topic of Jungian psychology. So I just want to say that I don't really want to go into this in much more detail, but Kathy, you do have to educate me, because I don't know anything about it, honestly. And in order for me to present and discuss something, I need to understand it. Okay. And martial arts, I feel I understand. I'm a retired lieutenant colonel from the Marine Corps. I know how to defend myself, let's say. And yet I also know that there's no Marine that wants to start a battle, okay, and start a war, okay. And far be it from me to suggest that we should do that in any way, in any case. But in fairness to our discussion, I just don't know enough about Pilates or any other approach that would be useful, okay, in order to present it in a rational way to principals who, all 3 of which are steeped in this rational world of 21st century education. And if I can't explain it to them, they cannot explain it to their superiors, and so on. And whereas I think that if I simply say martial arts and Aikido, at least a penny will drop with those people.
And then you can bring Pilates in to enhance that once it's there, because then it's legit in terms of what they understand. I think for me,
and I'm not sure that it will even be there. I mean, I thought about this for a month or so now in terms of introducing martial arts, because I wanted to introduce something that's spiritual but not spiritual as a way to get through to these kids.
well,
I'm
that's
already
Alan
going
Watts,
to
you know?
huh?
That's Alan Watts. Zen isn't sitting around trying to think about God while peeling the potatoes. It's just peeling the damn potatoes, you know? And I like the fact that I like the skin, so I don't even do that. And I think from a Jungian perspective, Jung's saying when those people saw the shadow and said, "You are I." From my perspective, what I heard with Kathy and Pilates is that controlology, the control of the body, or as I'd say, navigation, same kind of gig. Your shadow is your most respectful ally. It's always following you around. So, and at noon, it is sheltered under your feet. High noon, it disappears. Nope, it's under you. So it's soulful support. But I think that whole Pilates piece of the controlology of part of it, not just the exercises. And
so I'm
the humbler.
So Kathy, my issue is I'm a new school teacher. I'm a rookie. Okay, I'm in my first year of teaching K through 12. Okay, and I managed to land myself in one of the most complicated schools that we have. We have 125 schools. We have one other that's more complicated, and that school is certified for emotional disabilities.
Well, that was Providence on the move, Skip. You ended up there. That was no accident.
Right. And when the assistant principal called me and started to describe what her school was, I cut her off about halfway through and I said, "When can I come and look at your school? This is exactly what I want." Okay. And I came 2 hours later to the school and had my first interview, and I said, "I want this job." Okay, very clearly, I want this job. And even though some aspects of it are very difficult, I not only one, I think it's fun, but number two, I think it's why I'm there. When it's difficult like that, I feel like it's why I'm there. And so I do feel that, very intensely, that Providence brought this to me. And, I don't know how others will react to me after 4 quarters, where we've just finished 1 quarter. And I was dropped into it without knowing anything about what I was doing. Nothing. I really had no clue what it meant to be a special educator. Okay, because that's the job I have, special educator. And I'm starting to get the hang of it now. And we'll see whether, number one, my body can stand up to it. And number two, whether what I bring, which is going to include doing Rocky in the second quarter with some of these students in the second period, whether that'll be well received. Okay. Now, what I believe is it will calm our student body down. Okay, just doing that, but I'm not sure. So anyway, I need to move on. Any other final comments, Kathy, before we leave? I don't want to leave you high and dry. I don't want to cut you off on your idea. I just don't know anything about it.
I have a
Okay.
question.
Yes, okay.
You know, yeah, and I'm in New York City.
Mhm.
So, and here in New York, while I was growing up, I'm so glad that I lived near the Hall of Science growing up. And so my school would always take us on school trips. And something that I've also noticed growing up and doing some curriculum creating in my early 20s is sometimes children just want to rest. They just want to take a break. So
Mhm.
what I do with my child is I give my child about 15 minutes, which usually turns into 45 minutes to 60 minutes of rest when he comes home from school, because I just want him to absorb all of that information, all of those demands, all of that social conformity and assimilating, to just, pause for a moment and you know, just be himself, just nothing and being, being and nothingness. So that's what I do with my kid. But something that I wish all schools in the United States and possibly even the world have is here in New York City, what we have is something called the Culture Pass.
Mhm.
And all you need is a library card. You go to culturepass.com or .org. Then you put in your library card number pin, and there you are. So you're able to select any museum, any historical landmark, anything that you want, Carnegie Hall, and you just look at the little calendar, what days of the week, which day am I available, click on that day, and you've just made a reservation for free, and you can go into Carnegie Hall or the Dykeman House or the Met for free. You don't have to pay anything. It doesn't have to be on a Friday. It could be on a Tuesday. Right. So I think this
Oh,
is,
so Amela,
yeah,
sorry, there was another little
another
hiccup in the,
glitch.
yeah, so
Uh-oh.
could you say from all you need is a library card and then
Oh,
what?
yes. I'm so sorry. So all you need is your library card and your PIN number. You put it into that Culture Pass website, and they allow the person to basically have access to landmarks, historic landmarks like the Dykeman House or
Mhm.
At the Bound House or the Met Museum or the Tenement or MoMA, whatever it is that your heart desires, you can go for free. It doesn't have to be on a Friday. It could be on a Tuesday. And this is necessary because America is a melting pot. We came in here, we going into California searching for gold. We went there as Irish. We came
Mhm.
back as Irish German, So,
Well, we came back as
so it's
Americans.
important. Yeah. So it's very important to look at one's history, just like I think it was the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They just recently unraveled a man in a background of a portrait, a family portrait, where he was a servant to that family. And lo and behold, he said, "Oh my gosh, we have to find more paintings like this in American history where, there's that one person in the background who could possibly be a relative to them and not just a slave to the property or indentured servant to the property. This is a relative, and it's so important to our history and to the country." So acknowledging culture is one step because you're validating someone's existence, and Aikido for sure, because it's something that requires self-discipline, and that's very important. Because I tell my child, don't let people make you do something. Learn self-control.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and so anyway, this is a conversation I'm willing to have, Kathy. Although let's do it offline from here if we can. Okay.
Thank you so much.
And
Thanks, everyone.
right. And next week we will start on page 407.
Mhm.
And what else did I want to say? Well, let's see.
Ay, ay, ay.
I'll leave it at that for now. I've got to now that I've stepped up in my school, I have to have something to do with these children every day in second period. And the question is, can I keep it going? And, I feel strongly that I can, but we'll have to see. Pardon?
I have a 10:45, so we're closing up. So
okay, peace, everyone. We'll see you next week.